Welcome to the entire history of the pirate Blackbeard. Boring history for sleep. Tonight, we drift into the quiet waters of the early 18th century, where the sea carries both whispers of trade and shadows of danger. You will hear of Edward Teach, the man who became Blackbeard, whose presence on the horizon could silence even the bravest hearts. This is not a tale of noise and fury, but a gentle unfolding of history, told softly, like waves brushing against the shore. As you listen, let your mind float between fact and legend, between man and myth, carried slowly by the rhythm of the sea. Here on Mythoria, the stories of the past are told like lullabies, easing you into calm reflection as the world outside grows still. Now let us begin. The entire history of the pirate Blackbeard. The entire history of the pirate Blackbeard, a quiet sea. Before the storm, you close your eyes, and you drift back to the beginning of the 18th century. The year is not marked sharply in your mind. It feels more like a soft horizon where time itself blends into the slow rhythm of the sea. The Caribbean lies before you, warm and shimmering, its waters calm beneath the sun. Trade winds sigh gently against the sails of merchant ships, carrying sugar, tobacco, rum, and human lives across oceans. The world is shifting, quietly but powerfully, as empires expand and commerce grows fat with wealth. Yet beneath the calm, you sense something stirring, like a storm beyond the horizon, unseen but inevitable. You breathe slowly and imagine the sailors who lived in this world, moving between ports, carrying not only cargo but stories. Stories of danger, of lawlessness, of men who lived outside the boundaries of kingdoms and kings. The Caribbean in this time is both promise and peril. The promise lies in golden trade, in colonies that flourish under European crowns. But the peril lies in waters too vast to police, in coasts too jagged to guard. And so, the sea itself becomes a stage for something darker. You imagine yourself standing on a creaking dock in a port like Nassau, Jamaica, or Charleston. You hear the cries of merchants haggling, the heavy footsteps of sailors, and the calls of gulls above. Everything feels ordinary, yet behind these ordinary sounds hides a silence, the kind of silence that comes before thunder breaks. Pirates are not yet legends in this moment. They are whispers. They are shadows in the imagination of merchants who pray their ships will reach harbor without trouble. But already there are signs. A vessel found empty on the horizon, a flag glimpsed too late, a tale told in hushed voices at a tavern where rum burns throats and hearts alike. You lean closer as though you are there, listening. The air tastes of salt and the unease lingers like humidity. This is the stage into which Edward Teach is born. Not yet Blackbeard, not yet the terror of sailors and captains. For now, he is only one of many souls adrift in a world of restless change. His life begins in Bristol, England, though no one writes down the details clearly. Some say he was a sailor even in youth, learning the ways of tide and rope, watching men risk their lives for pay too small to match the danger. The truth is uncertain, and uncertainty is where legends begin. As you breathe deeper, you feel the weight of history move slowly, like the tide rolling in. You understand that piracy does not arise from nothing. It is born from imbalance. Nations grow rich, but sailors remain poor. Merchants count gold, but crews receive scraps. In that gap, a hunger grows. A hunger for more, for freedom, for defiance against the order of crowns and laws. Perhaps you too feel that hunger stirring, quiet, subtle, almost like a distant drumbeat carried across water. The quiet sea before the storm is not truly quiet. It is full of tension. Beneath the laughter in taverns, beneath the chatter in markets, beneath the creak of masts and ropes, there is a tremor. It is the sense that something is about to rise, something that will make the world tremble. You feel it in your chest, as though your own heartbeat echoes the growing rhythm. Edward Teach will become part of that rhythm. He will step into the silence, and he will fill it with fire and smoke. But for now, he is only a man among many, waiting for the moment when fate calls him forward. The Caribbean waters shimmer. The sails flap gently in the breeze, and yet you can almost see it, the storm gathering far away, but coming closer with every passing tide. The question lingers softly in your mind, like a whisper before sleep. When calm seas give way to chaos, what kind of man will rise from the waves? The making of Edward. Teach you meet Edward Teach, a man of mystery. Some say he was born in Bristol, England, his life shaped by restless tides. You hear of a sailor who becomes something larger, a man who begins to choose legend over anonymity. You linger now in the soft haze of memory, carried from the wide Caribbean back across the Atlantic, to England, to the bustling port city of Bristol. It is here, most historians believe, that Edward Teach first drew breath. His name may have been spelled Thatch, or even Thatch, for spelling in those days was as restless as the sea itself. Yet, whoever he was, and however his name was written, he was shaped by the rhythm of waves, the call of trade, and the hunger for something greater. Bristol, in the late 17th century, is a city of smoke and sails. You imagine cobblestone streets lined with timbered houses, taverns echoing with voices of sailors, fresh from voyages, and the air rich with the scent of tar, salt, and burning coal. Ships crowd the harbor, unloading sugar from the West Indies, tobacco from Virginia, and enslaved Africans bound by chains of empire. In this world, Edward grows up, a boy, perhaps watching ships vanish into the horizon, his mind filled with questions. Where do they go? What lies beyond the sea? Could life be different than the narrow streets of Bristol? Little is known about his youth, and this uncertainty leaves space for your imagination to wander. Did he grow restless at the monotony of labor? Did he learn to read the stars from older sailors who told tales over mugs of ale? Did he watch the world change as England expanded its grip over distant lands? The truth is obscured, but the possibilities unfold like sails opening to the wind. What is more certain is that Edward became a sailor, serving aboard privateer ships during Queen Anne's War. Privateers were legal pirates, holding licenses called letters of marque from their governments, which allowed them to attack enemy vessels. For England, this meant striking at French and Spanish ships, plundering their goods, and weakening their empires. For sailors like Edward, it meant adventure, profit, and the intoxicating taste of power. You close your eyes and imagine Edward aboard a privateer vessel. The deck is slick with salt water, cannons line the sides, and the crew is hardened, driven not only by duty, but by greed. Edward learns quickly how to tie knots, how to handle weapons, how to fight when the clash of steel meets the roar of cannon fire. The young man becomes accustomed to danger, and danger begins to feel like home. It is here, in these years of privateering, that Edward begins to transform. He is no longer only a sailor. He is a man who sees the imbalance of the world, who notices how captains and merchants grow rich while common sailors risk everything for scraps. He sees death, but also opportunity. He learns that life at sea is unpredictable, but that unpredictability can be bent, even mastered, by those bold enough to claim it. And so, Edward Teach drifts toward a different life. When the war ends in 1713, many privateers find themselves without employment. Their letters of marque are worthless, their ships disbanded, their crews dismissed. But the hunger does not vanish. Instead, it grows sharper. Some return to merchant work, to quieter lives. But others, including Edward, choose another path. They do not return to anonymity. They do not surrender to poverty. They turn instead to piracy. You breathe deeply, feeling the inevitability of his choice. The sea has already marked him. The years of privateering have given him skill, courage, and the taste of plunder. To go back to being a common sailor would be like asking a storm to rest quietly in the harbor. And so Edward begins to step away from the ordinary, moving toward the extraordinary. In this moment, he is still Edward Teach. His beard is unremarkable. His name is not yet feared. But something inside him has shifted. He is beginning to imagine a different kind of life, one that blends fear and fascination, brutality and theater, one that will echo for centuries. And so the question settles gently in your thoughts, like a tide waiting to rise. How does an ordinary sailor choose to become a legend? Becoming Blackbeard. You watch as Edward adorns himself with smoke, burning slow fuses in his beard to appear monstrous. He sails aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge, commanding both fear and awe. A name is born, Blackbeard. You drift further into Edward Teach's journey, into the moment where an ordinary sailor begins to slip into legend. The war has ended, privateer commissions have vanished, and the seas grow restless with men who have tasted both blood and freedom. Edward is among them, a man too seasoned to return to quiet merchant duty, too ambitious to accept small wages for great risks. And so, the path unfolds toward piracy, where a sailor becomes something more, something unforgettable. Edward first attaches himself to the notorious pirate Benjamin Hornigold, one of the fiercest marauders of the time. Under Hornigold's command, he gains not only wealth, but also lessons in leadership and fear. You imagine Edward watching closely, how Hornigold chose his targets, how he managed unruly crews, how he struck terror before a single shot was fired. In these lessons, Edward begins to understand that piracy is not only about violence, but about theater. The sea is wide, but men are more easily controlled when fear sails ahead of cannon fire. It is here that Edward begins to transform himself. Slowly, deliberately, he crafts an image that will carry weight far beyond the reach of his sword. He grows his beard long, thick, and black, letting it spread across his chest like a dark tide. He ties slow-burning fuses into his hair and beard, lighting them so that smoke coils around his face during battle. To his enemies, he appears not as a man, but as a demon rising from the sea, eyes glaring through a mask of smoke and flame. You pause to breathe, to imagine what it must have been like for sailors encountering him. The crack of muskets, the roar of cannons, and through the haze, this towering figure, his beard blazing, his presence larger than life. It was not only his weapons that conquered ships, but the sheer terror of his image. Sailors often surrendered without a fight, their imaginations already defeated before steel ever touched flesh. By 1717, Edward commands his own vessel. Fate grants him a ship of power, the captured French slaver La Concorde, which he refits and renames the Queen Anne's Revenge. The name itself carries weight, a reminder of a war just ended, a whisper of loyalty twisted into defiance. With this vessel, armed with dozens of cannons and a crew of hardened men, Edward Teach becomes something else entirely. He becomes Blackbeard. You breathe slowly, sensing the shift. A name is not just a label. It is a spell. Blackbeard spreads across the Caribbean like smoke, whispered in taverns, feared in ports. Merchants hear it and tremble. Governors hear it and frown. Sailors hear it and wonder if they will survive another voyage. The man and the myth begin to merge. And yet, Blackbeard is not only savage, he is also cunning. He understands that fear can win battles before they begin, and that reputation is more valuable than blood. Some captains report that Blackbeard spared their crews, taking cargo but leaving lives intact. Others insist he was ruthless, delighting in cruelty. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps he balanced mercy and terror like weights on a scale, always ensuring his name grew heavier in the minds of men. The transformation is complete. Edward Teach, once a sailor among many, is gone. In his place stands Blackbeard, a figure larger than life, a shadow stretching across oceans. You feel the chill of that shadow even now, centuries later. His presence lingers, carried by the rhythm of waves, by the fear etched into records and rumors alike. As you settle deeper into this moment, the question rises softly, like smoke curling into night air. When a man becomes a myth, does he still belong to himself, or only to the fear he has created? The pirate's reign. You follow his raids across the American coast and Caribbean, where villages tremble at the sight of his sails. Yet beyond the violence lies cunning strategy, blockades, alliances, and a strange code of balance between brutality and mercy. You float now into the height of Blackbeard's power, into the years when his name carried across oceans like the sound of thunder rolling over distant hills. The Queen Anne's Revenge cuts through the Caribbean, its black flag rising against pale skies, its cannons bristling with menace. At this point, Blackbeard commands not just a ship, but an empire of fear. His reign is not measured in kingdoms or borders, but in the trembling hearts of those who glimpse his sails. You imagine the American coastline in 1717 and 1718, dotted with fragile colonies still trying to grow. These settlements depend on trade ships arriving safely, their holds full of sugar, spices, and goods from across the Atlantic. But when the silhouette of Blackbeard's ship appears on the horizon, all certainty crumbles. Captains know the truth. Their voyage has ended. Resistance seems useless. To fight is to die. To surrender is to live, though stripped of treasure. And so, more often than not, ships yield without a shot fired. Blackbeard's reputation fights the battle for him. He does not merely raid the open seas, he blockades entire ports. You picture Charleston, South Carolina, in the spring of 1718. The town is paralyzed as Blackbeard's fleet looms at its entrance, cutting off supplies, holding merchants and passengers hostage. The people wait anxiously, knowing their lives hang on his decision. And yet, what he demands is not gold, nor slaves, nor land, but medicine. This choice reveals something about the man. For all his fearsome image, he knows the value of healing, the necessity of remedies for his crew. Perhaps he is brutal, but he is not senseless. Blackbeard's reign is built as much on cunning as on violence. He understands the performance of power, how terror magnifies with each retelling. A single act of cruelty may echo louder than 10 acts of mercy. And so he walks a line between myth and man. Sailors describe him as monstrous, yet some accounts recall him as surprisingly fair, distributing plunder evenly among his men, even allowing prisoners to live. He knew that consistency bound his crew, that loyalty fed on equality. You breathe deeply and consider how different this pirate empire was from the empires of crowns and kings. Blackbeard's authority was not ordained by God, nor written in law. It was held together by charisma, by reputation, and by the promise of freedom from the rigid hierarchy of ordinary life. His crew followed him because he gave them choice, spoils, and a sense of belonging outside the reach of empires. In a way, his reign reflects not just greed, but rebellion against a world that left so many men voiceless. Yet, every reign carries within it the seed of its end. Colonial governors grow restless. Merchants petition for protection. The crown cannot allow pirates to choke trade routes forever. Already, Blackbeard feels the tide shifting. He accepts a pardon briefly in North Carolina, a fragile attempt to return to legality. But the hunger for freedom, the temptation of the sea, proves stronger. Soon he sails again, his flag unfurled, his legend deepening even as the noose of empire tightens around him. In these years, Blackbeard becomes more than a man. He becomes a story, retold in every harbor, reshaped by fear, by envy, by awe. Perhaps he revels in it. Perhaps he is trapped by it. Either way, his reign stands as proof that one man, through vision and terror, can hold entire colonies in his shadow. The night grows quieter as you sit with this thought, waves rolling softly against the edges of your mind. His reign is vast, yet fragile, like a flame in the wind. And so, a gentle question remains, settling in the silence. How long can a man ride the storm before the storm turns against him? The final battle at Ocracoke. You arrive at Ocracoke, North Carolina, where Blackbeard's fate meets the king's navy. Gunfire echoes across dawn's stillness. You see a man fighting with desperate fury, his legend burning even as his body falls. You drift now to the last chapter of Blackbeard's living story, to the moment where myth collides with mortality. The year is 1718, and the waters near Ocracoke Inlet in North Carolina are calm, their surface gleaming beneath the rising sun. Yet beneath that calm, destiny gathers. Blackbeard has returned to piracy despite his brief pardon. He has resumed the life that made him both feared and admired, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to live quietly. For men who have tasted legend, silence is unbearable. Colonial governors, pressured by merchants and by the crown itself, resolved to end the threat once and for all. In Virginia, Governor Alexander Spotswood sends Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy to hunt Blackbeard down. Maynard sails south with determination and steel, knowing that to capture or kill Blackbeard is to rid the colonies of their most dangerous pirate. You imagine the early morning mist, the water still, the horizon pale with light. Blackbeard's ship, smaller now than his once mighty Queen Anne's Revenge, lies anchored near Ocracoke. His crew is reduced, his empire fractured, but his spirit remains fierce. He does not flee. Perhaps he cannot. Perhaps he chooses to face whatever comes, knowing that stories are not written in retreat, but in fire. Maynard's sloops approach, their sails taut, their cannons ready. Blackbeard sees them and prepares. The battle begins with thunder. Cannon fire rips across the water, smoke clouding the air. The clash is sudden, violent, and close. You hear the roar of guns, the shouts of men, the crash of musket balls striking wood. Blackbeard's crew fights with desperate fury, unwilling to surrender, unwilling to give up the freedom they carved from empire's grip. Maynard's tactic is ruthless. After his ship is battered, he orders most of his men below deck, hiding them from view. Blackbeard, seeing a weakened opponent, boards Maynard's vessel with his own men, expecting an easy finish. But suddenly, Maynard's hidden sailors burst forth, swarming the pirates in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The deck becomes a storm of steel, blood, and smoke. And there stands Blackbeard, tall, fierce, his beard wild, his eyes blazing. He fights like a man who knows he carries more than his own life. He carries a legend. Reports say he sustains 5 gunshot wounds and more than 20 cuts from blades, yet still he battles. Refusing to fall, you picture him swinging his sword, firing his pistols, pressing forward even as his strength ebbs away. Each strike is not only against flesh, but against the inevitability of death itself. At last, surrounded and bleeding, Blackbeard collapses. His body is broken, but his myth is unbroken. Maynard, to prove the victory, orders his head severed and hung from the bowsprit of his ship. The sight is both grisly and symbolic. The end of a man, but the birth of something greater. For in death, Blackbeard's name only grows louder. You sit quietly with this image. The waters of Ocracoke, once calm, now run heavy with memory. The cries of men fade, the smoke drifts away, the sun rises higher. And in that silence, you feel the paradox. Blackbeard is dead, yet more alive than ever. His story spreads, carried by sailors, by newspapers, by whispers in taverns. He becomes not only a pirate, but a symbol, a reminder of defiance, of fear, of the fragile boundary between man and myth. As you breathe slowly, you reflect on the cost of legend. Blackbeard fought until the very end, his body refusing surrender until it could fight no more. His death is violent, but also strangely fitting. For a man who lived as a storm, how else could he leave the world but in fire and fury? And so the question lingers softly in your heart, as though asked by the sea itself. When a man dies but his story refuses to sink, has he truly been defeated? The ghost of the sea. You rest with the echoes of his story, how fear lingered long after his death. Sailors swore the spirit of Blackbeard still haunted the coast. You reflect on how a man became myth, and how myths never truly sink. You rest now in the silence after the storm, in the long echo that follows Blackbeard's death at Ocracoke. The man is gone, his body broken, his head displayed as a warning. Yet as you close your eyes, you feel the presence remains. Legends do not die with flesh. They slip into memory, into whispers, into the uneasy hearts of those who sail the same waters. And so, Blackbeard lingers. Not as Edward Teach, the sailor, but as something else entirely, a ghost of the sea. For sailors, memory becomes superstition. Men swear they see his shadow pacing the deck of ships near Ocracoke, a dark figure outlined against the moon. Some claim the waters glow red on certain nights, as if remembering the blood spilled in his last battle. Others whisper that his headless body swims the channel still, searching endlessly for what was taken. These tales grow in taverns and ports, spreading from one mouth to another, until Blackbeard's spirit is everywhere, haunting not only the coast but the imagination of a world that cannot let him go. You breathe deeply and consider how fear works. Fear lingers. It grows larger when left in silence. And Blackbeard, in life, mastered fear as his weapon. In death, that weapon sharpened. Children in coastal towns are warned of his name. Captains, even decades later, use his legend to keep order among restless crews. The man is gone, but the myth remains stronger than steel, more enduring than rope. History itself is uncertain about Edward Teach. Few records survive. His birth is vague, his family unknown, his years as a sailor only partially traced. Yet in that uncertainty lies power. The gaps become space for story, for exaggeration, for transformation. Was he cruel beyond measure, or strangely merciful? Was he a monster, or merely a clever man who understood theater? The lack of answers allows the myth to swell, to become whatever people need it to be. Governors declared his death a victory, proof that empire could still control the seas. But even they could not erase him. His legend undermined their triumph. The name Blackbeard became a symbol larger than their laws, a symbol of rebellion, of freedom, of the possibility that ordinary men could defy empires and, for a time, live beyond their reach. And so, long after his body sank, his story continued to sail. You reflect quietly on the nature of such ghosts. Blackbeard's is not a haunting of malice alone. It is also a haunting of wonder. His life reminds us of the thin line between man and myth, between flesh and imagination. The beard, the smoke, the fire in his eyes. All of it carefully crafted, yet all of it now eternal. He reminds us that history is not only about facts, but about the way people remember and the way memory shapes itself into story. As you rest deeper, you imagine the waters of Ocracoke again, calm, glistening, timeless. Somewhere beneath, the bones of Edward Teach lie quiet, dissolved into the sea. And yet in the air above, his presence drifts like mist. He is there in the sigh of the tide, in the creak of ships passing through, in the stories whispered to weary sailors. The ghost of Blackbeard is not trapped in one place. It lives in every retelling, every imagination, every moment when history becomes dream. And so, you ask yourself gently, as your breathing slows, perhaps the true measure of a life is not how it ends, but how long it is remembered. Blackbeard's empire lasted only a handful of years, yet his story has sailed across centuries. He remains, not as Edward, not even as Blackbeard, but as a spirit that refuses to sink. The question drifts softly into the night, wrapping you like a lullaby. When the sea itself holds your memory, do you ever truly disappear? And so, your mind drifts with the tide, carrying you back from the roar of cannons and the smoke of battles into the stillness of night. The story of Blackbeard, fierce and fleeting, rests now like a fading echo upon calm waters. He was a man, a myth, and at last a ghost, proof that even the fiercest storms pass, leaving only whispers behind. You feel the rhythm of the sea within you, slow and steady, like your own breath in the dark. Legends rise and legends fade, but the ocean remains, infinite and patient, holding their memory gently in its depths. As you surrender to rest, you are reminded that history itself is a lullaby. Every tale, no matter how violent, becomes soft when told across time. And now Blackbeard's shadow quiets, and his ghost drifts away, leaving you with peace, with stillness, with sleep. Close your eyes, let the waves carry you, and remember, even the greatest storms end in silence.